be back with all of you. I feel like I've had a little bit of a break, but I've missed you. It's nice to see so many familiar faces, truly, and nice to see new faces. I'm just excited to be learning with you. And so the topic that we're going to be exploring together over the next 4 sessions is faith and doubt. And I have to say 2 things that maybe feel like funny things to say back to back. One is the texts that we're going to be learning together are texts that have become really near and dear to my heart. They're texts that I've spent a lot of time learning and thinking about that just bring up a lot of feelings for me. And I'm just so eager to share them with you and to hear what kind of feelings and thoughts they bring up for you as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I want to say is, I've been teaching a lot about faith and doubt recently. And even as I've been teaching a lot about it, I continue to be a little bit baffled that I'm teaching so much about it. And here's why. I would not describe myself as being someone of really strong belief and strong faith. There was someone that I was with in rabbinical school. We were doing a pastoral internship, a pastoral rotation together, and he would say in this beautiful way that when he entered a room to be with someone, he felt that the Shechina, he felt that God's presence was entering the room with him. He had just such a secure and strong connection to God and such a secure and strong connection to his faith. And it was beautiful, and I really envied him that. I would say that's not my relationship to my faith. I am someone that over many years, I would say the language that feels most resonant to me is I am someone that I am a seeker. I am longing for God. I am longing to feel that kind of direct relationship and intimacy with God. If only I felt like when I walked in the room, I felt God's presence so strongly with me. But I can't honestly say that I do feel that. So I would say that much of my sort of like religious life, and even my life now as a rabbi, has been sort of wanting to feel that kind of direct connection, seeking out that connection, and really longing for it and thinking about it, but also at the same time having all sorts of questions and doubts. And so I guess I would think that the rabbi that would be teaching about faith and doubt would be one that had a really sort of like secure relationship to faith. And I would say that that's not me. You're getting me with all of sort of my honesty and my vulnerability and my own thought process. And I hope that is an invitation to you to bring all of your honesty and all of your vulnerability and all of your thought process as we encounter these texts together. So we're gonna start out by learning 2 different texts today from the Eish Kodesh. The Eish Kodesh is Rabbi Kalonymus Kalman Shapira. Rabbi Shapira was writing from the Warsaw ghetto from 1939 to 1942. So he was writing sort of during one of the most horrific periods in our history. And he's written a number of volumes. Some of his volumes are on teaching and education, but he also has a work that's called the Eish Kodesh. And so he's sort of like nicknamed after his own work, the Eish Kodesh, which is basically a drasha or a couple of drashot organized by each parsha. And so early in the pandemic, really, I think sort of, in 2020, 2021, I spent a year just really getting intimate with the Eish Kodesh, where like that was the thing I was learning, is just learning through all of his drashot. They're not long, they're relatively short. It's actually like a pretty doable project to learn all the drashot from the Eish Kodesh. But it was a year of, I think that, and not to in any way make a comparison between the pandemic and between, the Holocaust, God forbid, but at a time in which our world was experiencing so much upheaval and crisis and despair, I found myself turning to the Eish Kodesh to sort of see like, what was the sense that he was making of his time, and was there Torah from the Eish Kodesh that might offer something for us in our time. And for my learnings from the Eish Kodesh, I felt, and so basically I would say is essentially what's animating the work of the Eish Kodesh is the question, what does it mean to be a religious person of faith in a time of sort of great crisis, in a time of despair, in a time of hardship. What does it mean to be a religious person of faith in a time when so many people are broken, when the world is falling apart? Really, he's just writing about faith sort of over and over again in different ways, exploring his own relationship to faith and God and prayer and doubt. And I would say, on the one hand, I felt so drawn and compelled to his faith, that in the face of sort of the extreme brokenness and horror that he was seeing and experiencing, he is able to maintain on to such a strong sense of faith. And I felt so, there was something so compelling about it. And at the same time that I felt so compelled by it, I also felt a little bit distanced by it, or maybe even alienated, because his faith feels so different than my own faith. My faith is such a shaky one, and he, even and sort of in the worst of times, was able to have such a sure faith. And so when I learned the Eish Kodesh, I don't necessarily learn it as a, okay, what he says applies directly onto my life, but it's almost like sort of an examination of what would it look like to have this kind of faith, and in what way does this resonate with my own experience of faith, and in what way does it not resonate? And so I really invite you to approach the Eish Kodesh in the same way. It may be that in his Torah you find a lot of resonance, and it may be that some of his Torah you say, I don't know, that doesn't really work for me. Okay, so without further ado, I know Cyril has shared the source sheet, and we're gonna go ahead and dive in. So I'll go ahead and screen share. And just to remind you sort of like our method in this class is I'll screen share, we'll do a little bit of learning, I'll sort of give over the text a bit together, and then at a certain moment I'll say, I'll like turn to the chat and like really give my full attention to the chat for your thoughts and comments. You're welcome to be putting your thoughts and questions into the chat while I'm teaching. I won't necessarily be seeing them, but at sort of a designated moment I'll turn my focus, and then you'll know I'm really focusing on the chat then, because I really do, you know, to the extent that we can have sort of an intimate conversation and exchange of ideas with 90 people on the call, I very much do want to hear your thoughts and responses. This is it's a deeply personal topic for me, and I want to give you the invitation that let it to be a deeply personal topic for you as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go into screen sharing. I'll just make this a bit bigger. Okay, so this first Torah that we're going to look at, this comes from Parshat Shlach. So this is Parshat Shlach, where we're talking about Moshe sending the spies into the land of Israel. And you know the story of what happens. Moshe sends the spies into the land of Israel, and they discover all of these amazing things, that the land is filled with milk and honey, and it's wonderful. But there's also some not so great things. Like it turns out that the land is inhabited by giants and heavily fortified. And the spies come back and say, yeah, that land is amazing, and it's settled, and we cannot do this, and we're not going in. And the spies' lack of faith leads all of the Israelites, all of Bnei Israel in the wilderness. They lose faith and they rebel, and this becomes a whole sort of catastrophe. And the spies generally get a really bad rap sort of in Jewish history as like the example of people who didn't trust in God and didn't have faith. So this Torah is the Eish Kodesh's Torah on Parshat Shlach. So it says, "V'navina hameraglim dvarim shel ta'am v'sechel amru." He said, we're going to see that the spies spoke words of sort of reason and logic. That's already, I just want to do a strong pause there. No one says that about the spies, right? Everyone says about the spies, they were horrible people who didn't believe in God, and as a result of that, all of us lost faith, and that was the downfall of the Jewish people. And now the Eish Kodesh is starting out and saying, Varim shal ta'am v'sechel amru. They actually said things that made a lot of sense, that were very reasonable. What did the spies say? Efes ki az ha'am hayoshev ba'aretz v'ha'arim b'tzurot gedolot me'od v'gam yeledei ha'anak re'inu sham. He says, the spies say, okay, the land is amazing, it's filled with milk and honey, but however, the people are strong and they are settled in the land, and their cities are very large and they are fortified, and the children of giants they saw there, right? These statements that are taken as the spies' lack of faith, the Eish Kodesh is saying they were quite rational, reasonable statements. Then lama lo hitvakech Kaleb imahem listor et sichlan b'divrei ta'amehem. And why didn't Caleb, right? Caleb is one of the leaders of the Jewish people. Why didn't Caleb, when he heard this very reasonable and logical thing that the spies said, why didn't Caleb try to argue with them and to contradict their reasoning, to contradict their logic? They said something that was very reasonable and logical. And why didn't Caleb say, well, who cares that it's fortified? We have stronger armies, or we have more people, or we have strength. Why didn't he sort of argue with them, sort of combating reason for reason? What does Caleb do instead? Rak stam alo na'ale ve'yarashna ota ki yachonu chala. All he says simply is, we will certainly go up and we will inherit because we will be able to. We will overcome it. So there's sort of like an interesting pastoral moment that's happening here, where the spies come back and say these things that are quite reasonable, like the facts on the ground don't look good for us, and we don't think that we can do this. And Caleb, as the leader, instead of sort of point by point saying, okay, I recognize what you're saying, but here's the reason why you're wrong. Here's the reason why we can do it. All he says is, Alo na'aleh ve'yarashna ota ki yachonu chala. We can do it. Doesn't matter. We can do it. There's something almost, I think, a little bit dismissive about the way Caleb responds to the spies and their complaints. Okay, let's read on a little bit. But this is how it needs to be the faith of a Jewish person. Gam al pi sichlo b'derech hateva ya'amin b'Hashem sheyoshi'ehu v'yitzchazek. The faith of a Jewish person, not only at a moment when they see a mavo and a derech, when they see sort of a pathway forward to their salvation that is based on sort of reason and logic according to the ways of nature, should that person believe in God, that God will save them and be strengthened by it. Rak gam b'sha'a she'eino ro'eh chas v'chalila shum mavo al pi sechel v'derech hateva l'shuato ya'amin b'Hashem. Even actually, what it means that faith is not only at a time when you can see the way to salvation and it sort of like makes sense and follows the laws of nature as you would expect, but actually at a time when you, God forbid, don't see the pathway forward, where it seems like there's no way out of the crisis or the despair that you are in, that sort of based on the reasoning or laws or logic or intellect based on the laws of nature. Especially in that moment, what it means that faith is believe that God will save you, and to believe in God, and to be v'yitzchazek be'umenato u'bitchuno, and that a person should then be strengthened through their faith and through their trust. What does it mean to have faith? Sometimes you're going to be able to see, I'm in a hard situation, but I can see it's all going to work out, right? I can see, for whatever reason, I have these and these resources. Nature's going to play itself out. I can trust that God, trust in God, I trust that it's going to work out. He's saying, actually, Dafka, what it means to have faith is at a time when it doesn't make sense, when it seems like there's no way out of this situation, that's the time in which you have to trust in God. He says, "V'ada Rabba, b'sha'azo tov shelo litakesh limso eze sechel umavo al derech hateva." And actually, on the contrary, specifically at a time in which there's sort of, God forbid, you're in a situation of despair, and it doesn't seem like there's any way forward, right? Based on all the facts on the ground, their armies are large and fortified and their children are giants. It doesn't seem like this is going to work out well for you. On the contrary, you should not be stubborn and sort of insist to try to use reason or logic to try to find a path forward based on the laws of nature. Because simply you will not find it, right? If you are in a situation that seems like a hopeless situation of despair, in which based on the laws of nature, it doesn't seem like things are going to end well, he's saying, don't try to use your reason and intellect to sort of like logic your way out of it, because it's not going to work. You're not going to find that mavo. You're not going to find that pathway. As chas v'chalila tuchal emunato al yedei zeh li'baged, because then, God forbid, the person's faith can be injured through this attempt to try to find that mavo, find that pathway. And this sort of blemishing or damaging of a person's faith and trust in God can, God forbid, come to stop their salvation. That actually the thing that might prevent our salvation is the very act that we've lost faith, that we tried so hard to find this pathway forward, and then we're not able to find it. That damages our faith, And the damaging our faith might actually be the thing that prevents our salvation. What should we do? Rak tzarich lomar hakol emet. What do you need to do? You simply need to say that which is true. You need to say the thing that's true. What's true? She'az ha'am hayoshev ba'aretz. You have to say the people are strong, that are settled in the land. Kinim hadvarim she'arim betzurot gedolot me'od. You have to say things that are honest, that the cities are large and they are fortified. And mikol makom hineni ma'amin b'Hashem shehu lamala mehagvul v'hateva sheyoshienu. And in any event, regardless of these things that I just said that are true and honest and real, mikol makom, in any case, I believe in God, and I believe that God is above boundary, that God is above nature, and that God will save us. Alo na'aleh ve'yarashna ota, and you should say, like Caleb said, we will go up and we will surely inherit it. Belo sechel ubelo svara. You should say it sort of without, based on any intellect or reasoning. Ve'emunah ubitachon kazeh b'Hashem mekarevet yeshuatenu. And the person's faith and trust like this in God will bring near their salvation. Okay, so there's a few things that I want to sort of just highlight from this, and then I'm going to, in just a moment, turn to you in the chat. I would love to hear your responses to it. So several things there's something I'm just really personally really drawn to this text. A few things that I find really compelling about it. The first thing is I am a person. I'm a real like type A kind of person that when I find myself in a situation that I don't know how to get myself out of, I just spin myself in circles. I'm like constantly trying to like spin myself. I have questions that I don't have the answers to. So it's like, I think if I just keep asking myself the same question over and over and over, I'll be able to logic my way out of that situation. And I think what he's saying here is sometimes there can be a danger in overthinking, specifically in moments in which the answer is not there, where actually you don't have the answer in your capability and you just have to allow the situation to play out as it is. Spinning yourself in circles, overthinking things, sometimes there will be no sechel, there will be no ta'am, there will be no sort of intellect or reasoning to rely on. And at those moments, you have to let go of that. That sometimes your thinking is not actually going to serve you. So that's the first thing that really strikes me about this. The second thing that really strikes me about this that I think is so powerful is that he's saying what it means to have faith is not just to put on rose-colored glasses and to say everything is fine, everything's going to be okay. He says faith is not about having rose-colored glasses. What it means to have faith is the first step is actually to say the thing that is true and hard and real. That to have faith, you get to say the thing that is hard. You get to say the things that are honest. You get to say the people are children of giants. I don't think that I can do this. The cities are large and fortified. This is hard. This is breaking me. You get to be in that moment of saying the thing that is honest. And then what he's calling on us to do, and then here is the leap that I think is hard, is this language of mikol makom hineni ma'amin. But in any event, regardless, I believe in God. He's asking us to take this leap and say, despite the things that I know to be true, despite the things that I'm giving space to say are true, in any case, I believe in God. The last thing that I just want to raise, which I'm raising this really as sort of a question, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, he says, God forbid that when someone is trying to insist on finding that mavo, finding that pathway based on intellect and logic, God forbid, our faith can actually be damaged when we don't find that. And he says, and that actually this damaging our own faith can prevent our salvation. On the one hand, sometimes when I read this, I take this as there's something I think really harsh about this, because there's like a self-blaming on it to say, God forbid, when bad things happen to us, if salvation doesn't come, it's our fault. It's like our lack of faith is the thing that's resulting in the fact that we're not being saved. That feels very hard to be and problematic. Another way that sometimes I'm able to see it is reading that line that on the one hand, God forbid, when our faith is damaged, it can prevent our salvation. At the end, he says, when we are able to make that leap, when we are able to say, Alo na'aleh, we will surely go up, we will surely conquer, then our faith mekarevet Yeshuatenu, then our faith can actually be the instrument that draws near our salvation. So I think another way to read it is he's trying to say, even in situations in which it seems like we are powerless and we have no agency, which is certainly the case in the Holocaust. This is like a situation of so much hopelessness and powerlessness and lack of agency. He's trying to find a way to say, like, actually, even in that situation, we have agency, and it's through our faith that our faith actually has the ability to, God forbid, prevent our salvation, or maybe our faith has the ability to actually speed up and draw us near to salvation. And so on the one hand, I find there's something problematic to say, there's a blemish in our faith, and that's, God forbid, preventing our salvation. But I find there's something very compelling to say in a situation in which we have no agency, to say, actually, maybe we can find a little bit of agency there. Maybe our ability to have faith will somehow draw us nearer to salvation. Okay, I'm going to pause, and officially I'm going to stop screen sharing so I can really focus on the chat. And I think the question I would put to you is sort of a broad question, either to respond to any of the questions I'd asked, or to say, like, how is this text landing with your own understanding of faith? And really, to what extent does it resonate with you, and to what extent does it challenge you in some way? I also just want to say, I'm not going to get to read all of your comments out loud, but that's not to say that they're not all amazing. My eye can only see so many comments, so I'm just going to be sort of grabbing a few, but I'm excited to know that you are all reading all of each other's comments, and I encourage you to do that, even if I'm only able to highlight a few of them. Okay, so I'm going to turn to the chat now. So I see people are already sort of like asking questions about definitions of what is faith, what is salvation, which I really appreciate, and beginning to offer those definitions in the chat. So I think that those are great questions to be asking. I'm sort of throwing around the language of faith. A question I would put to you is, faith is something so specific to each of us, how we understand it. So Kathleen is offering us, faith is believing in what we cannot see, feel, or touch. It is allowing ourselves to be guided by the hand of God that we can neither feel nor see. Acknowledging the problems and the difficulties, it is letting go and letting God be, not me. So this is really beautiful, Kathleen. I think that there's a lot. This is sort of all encompassing in some ways, that faith is about believing what we cannot see or feel or touch. And it's sort of allowing ourselves to be given over to a God that, again, is something that we can't feel or see, taking that leap there. Talia Ann says, also to be willing to wrestle with doubt and be vulnerable and still not to give up. So I love this. I love that answer, that it's like, I wonder if you're getting that from sort of the end of his piece there, where he says, what does faith mean? Faith is not just saying, he doesn't say faith is just alon na'aleh. Faith is just saying we will surely go up and conquer. No, faith is making space for the fear and the doubt, and I'm not sure if we can do it, and saying the thing that are honest, and the komakom anima amin in any event. So that was really just beautifully put. Faith and doubt equals sanity. Oh, that's so interesting. Faith and doubt equals sanity, right? That it's like, it's not just about having the blind faith. Maybe that would be the thing that is a crazy thing to do. But having the faith sort of in conversation with the things that are honest and real and hard, and the doubts, that's sanity. Okay, thank you for that, Dahlia. That's really beautiful. So Deborah says, can't faith also be dangerous? So there could be a lot more that we could say about that comment. And I think that that's very fair. Yeah. I was learning this with someone, and they said, I think I do struggle a little bit with the turn in the piece where he says, say the things that are honest and true, and then mikol makom hineni ma'amin, in any event I believe. And that person said, oh, and so let me read this with Mark as well. Some people miss solutions because they rely on faith and give up on reason too soon. So I see actually Mark and Deborah's comment going together. And this person said, actually, I hate this Torah. And they said, this is so problematic of like, God forbid, you see the facts on the ground are like that this situation is not going to be successful, that you're like waging some military conquest, and all facts point to this is a bad idea. and you go ahead and do it anyway. And God forbid, what if your faith doesn't work out and you all get decimated? And it's like you made a really foolhardy decision. Yeah, so I think, Deborah, that's right. Do we read this? Is the blind faith here something as, well, you have faith and that faith actually draws the salvation near and it all works out? Or actually are there situations in which sort of acting against your intellect and your reason could put you in a really dangerous situation? Deborah, I think that's a really fair question. And Mark, as you're saying, on the one hand, I'm saying I'm really compelled to this, that it's like I can get myself in a cycle of overthinking things. And Mark, you're saying, well, sometimes maybe you need to stay in that period of thinking because you haven't yet found the solution. And if you just sort of stop the thinking to jump to the faith, you might miss something there. So I do appreciate, I think it's okay for us to say both what we find really compelling about this, but also what you might find challenging about this Torah as well. So Helen, I see you're asking me to slow down. I will try to do that. You're welcome to keep reminding me that. When I get excited about Torah, I tend to speak fast, and so I appreciate that reminder. Okay, Deb says, faith in God also allows you to see things that you might not be seeing with your rational eyes. God also allows those close to him to see things. So it's so interesting, Deb, and I think you're not the first person that made this connection between faith and seeing, or faith and what we don't see. But actually in the next piece that we're going to read by the Eish Kodesh, he also makes this it's very so close to what you're saying. He says, faith is not just sort of believing in things that we don't know. I don't know this thing, and so this is where I'm going to take a leap of faith and believe. He says faith is actually something much deeper. It's about this deep sense of soul sight. It's seeing with our soul, and that seeing draws us near to God. And then it might be that sort of deep seeing is almost more trustworthy than the things we see with our intellect, and the things we see that is right in front of us. That it's actually like a deeper, that it tends to be, we trust the thing that we see with our eyes. And he wants to say in this other piece that faith is a much deeper seeing, and actually that's the kind of seeing we should be relying on. So thank you so much for that. And you'll see that in the next piece there. So Tali Ann says, always have to be conscious that the Eish Kodesh was writing from the Warsaw ghetto, and his Torah was continually trying to lift the souls around him. Yeah, so I think that's so beautiful and important to remember, is to remember why is, like, what is he trying to offer his community, that in a time in which his community was really sort of seeing the worst, and people were so broken and everything. He says in another piece, how does he say it? He says, like, Kol HaKodesh neheras, everything holy is destroyed. He's trying to offer them some sort of hope. He's trying to offer them some sort of way to both make space for saying the thing that is true, but also to make that leap to Hineni ma'amin lemikol makom. So thank you for giving us that. Okay, we'll just read one more. Two more. So Arnold, you've written, faith requires you to act. So that's so interesting. Faith as something that sometimes I think faith can be sort of like a passive experience. I have faith and I sit back. Like, it could be you have faith and you sit back and rely on God, or faith could be a more active thing of I have faith, and so that requires me to take action and to take the leap of actually whatever that next step is, taking that next step forward. So I sort of want to leave that as a question, Arnold. I love the way you made that a statement, that faith should be something that requires us to act. Does our faith sort of move us to a place of passivity to say, oh, I'm just giving up and leaving it to God? Or can our faith actually move us to a place of agency and saying, I'm taking action myself? We'll read this last comment for now. Beth says, when two people making opposing decisions based on their faith, such that one will be successful and the other not, how is that understood? Was God with one and not the other? So Beth, that's such an interesting question. The way I understand that, Beth, you're saying, it might be that you have two people on sort of opposite sides of an issue or opposite sides of a fight. They're both relying on their faith. They're both taking that leap. but they're not both necessarily going to be successful. And so then how do we understand? They both had faith that they both had faith that was going to work out, but it only worked out for one of them. And so how do we understand was like, did one of them have God closer to the side? I don't have the answer to that, Beth, but I will say it's a hard question. It's like, how do we know? We want to take the leap to have the faith that whatever we're committing to is going to work out. But we never really know if that's, I don't know, how do we know? That's what's so hard. That's the questions and the doubt. How do we ever know if that's actually the right path or the right decision? So I would say, for me, this text is so compelling, both because of the way in which it allows us to say the thing that is honest and real and true. It doesn't just force us to sugarcoat it and say, it's all going to be okay. And on the other hand, I find this text challenge. I feel compelled by the language of mikol makom hineni ma'amin. In any event, I believe. I want to be able to get there myself. I think I want that, with the caveats of faith can be dangerous, and you need to think through the solutions with those caveats. But it's hard for me to make that leap myself because, as I said, I don't have the faith. The Eish Kodesh somehow has that faith, but I don't know that I have that faith myself. And so the next piece of Torah we're going to look at, I think, is speaking to the people who would say, I don't know if I can make that leap with you. I don't know if I could say mikol makom in any event, I believe. So we'll go back into screen sharing now. Again, feel free to continue putting your thoughts in the chat. I'm not going to be looking at them while we're actually in the text. But again, after we do a little bit more together, we'll come back to the chat. So this next piece that we're going to look at, this is still the Eish Kodesh, Rabbi Kalonymus Kalman Shapira. This is on his Devar Torah on Parshat HaChodesh. And this is from March 14th, 1942. So as I said, I think this was in reference to Deb's comment about a type of seeing. We're not going to do all of this inside here, but he says, I'll just start with the second line here. He says, Emunat ish ha-Yisraeli b'Hashem einat emunah rak mipnei she'eno yodea ma'amin. That the faith of a Jewish person in God is not just faith in the moments when they don't know they believe. It's not just like, I know the rest of the stuff I feel good about, this one thing I don't, so I'm going to believe in God in this moment. Rather, achu inyan yediyat v'rayat hanefesh. It's actually a matter of this knowing and seeing of the soul. That faith is something much deeper. It's a knowing and seeing of the soul, that in this knowing and seeing, he says, we glimpse a little bit of the greatness and the holiness of God. That this faith connects us to God, and it's through this glimpsing, getting this glimpse of the holiness of God, it allows us, lechen ha'ish hayodea ubatuach be'emunato yoter me'beyediat hasechel. And as a result of this sort of like deep sense of knowing and seeing, the person knows and trusts in their faith even more than in sort of the knowledge of the intellect. That's sort of what we were saying, that he has this idea of we sometimes sort of, it's like the things that we know and trust in are the things that we can like touch and see and taste and feel. And he's saying, actually, faith is something much deeper. It's sort of a different sense of knowing, and that's something that we're able to rely on that in a deeper way, that it brings us closer to God. This is so beautiful what he says here. He says, the re'iyah zo hi me'ein re'iyat hanevi'im. And this type of seeing, this sort of deep soul seeing of faith, is like a form of the seeing of the prophets. That this type of faith is a form of prophecy, he's saying. It's a form of the sort of seeing ahead to the future that the prophets were able to do. The only difference is that for the Nevi'im, for the prophets, it was like a revelation that was a real seeing. That was actually like revealed before their eyes. It was like a seeing that they really saw before their eyes. But for us who are not sort of prophets in that same way, it's an internal knowledge and certainty in faith that comes without seeing. I love this idea that faith, what is faith? That's something, again, it's like your answers of like, well, what do I mean when I say faith here? Faith what? Faith that it's all going to work out, faith that God will be there, faith that I don't know, faith, trust sort of in whatever will be, it's hard to know what faith is, but he's saying that faith is sort of the ability to see a future that is beyond the moment of crisis that we're in. That it's like sometimes when we are so sort of deep in despair and crisis, it seems like this moment will be the moment that lasts forever. And he's saying, no, faith is like a form of prophecy that allows us to have this deep vision without actually seeing it in front of our eyes of there will be another path forward. I can't see it now. I can't see that mavo before me. Logic is not going to get me there, but I have this ability to sort of know that there will be this other future, this other vision. And he's saying we actually have access to that form of prophecy in the same way that the prophets do, except for them, it was like they really saw it. And for us, this is deep knowing. Then he goes on and says something beautiful. He says, and this type of soul seeing that is our faith, it comes to us from the avot. It comes to us from our ancestors, that this faith is actually a gift. It's an inherited gift that's been passed down. Ki Yisrael im enan nevi'im, him b'nei nevi'im. Because if the Jews are not prophets themselves, they are the children of prophets. So this beautiful idea comes from the Talmud of Masechet Pesachim. There's some sort of like question about some Jewish law regarding Pesach and carrying the knife on Shabbat. Can I carry the knife? It doesn't matter, but there's like a halachic legal question that comes up that the sort of like the Jews pose before the rabbi, and the rabbi says, he doesn't give them an answer. They're looking for an answer. What do we do or what do I not do in this situation? The rabbi doesn't give them an answer. The rabbi says, leave it to the people to figure out why. They have the knowledge inside of them, because if they are not prophets themselves, they are the children of prophets, right? They have the knowledge that they need within them. If they are not prophets, they're the children of prophets, that this ability to sort of, that we have within us the knowledge we need and the faith we need because it's been handed down. And then we get another example of this. This is also, we have this in this collection of Midrashim on the book of Exodus, where She'amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, says to Moshe, Moshe says to God, God says, tell the people that God sent you and you're going to bring them out. And Moshe says, they're not going to believe me. Why would they believe me? They're going to say, who's this God? What do you mean? Who are you? And God says to Moshe, Hem ma'aminim, b'nei ma'aminim. God says they're going to believe you because they're the believers. They're the children of believers. That Moshe thinks these people are not believers. They don't have faith. And God says, even if they're not, they're believers. And even if they weren't believers, they're the children of believers. That in the same way that this sort of ability to see the future, this prophecy is handed down to us, so too our belief is handed down. Hainu, meaning what? She'emunatam avotehem hu lehem. That their faith comes to them through their ancestors because they are the children of believers. So this sort of beautiful idea that our faith gets handed down to us. Okay, well, what about those of us who are not feeling faith in any given moment? So he says, and it seems that there's two types of faith in a person. When a person is feeling strong, and even more so when a person is in a place of joy, then the person feels their faith with certainty. When things are going well in our life, when we are happy, we are able to imagine all sorts of positive outcomes for our life, and we are able to sort of have faith and certainty and sort of see these different visions for our life. And this is not the case when a person is in deep sadness, and even more so, God forbid, when a person is entirely broken. When a person is sad and broken, then what? There are those in those moments when a person is in deep sadness or a person is entirely broken that won't feel their faith. Why? Because faith is like sort of a divine type of prophecy. And in order to have access to prophecy, you need to be in a place of happiness. So just to say out again what I think he's saying here, we touched on this before, he's saying something so beautiful. He's saying faith is a form of prophecy, and to have access to prophecy, you need to be in a place of joy. Meaning when we are in a place of great sadness and despair, when we are broken, we can't imagine another way out. We can't imagine another future. We have no access to sort of the prophecy that would allow us to see past the moment we're in. That's not the case when we're in a state of happiness. We have access to this prophecy because we could see sort of like the next place where we're going to go. So he's saying, so God forbid, when a person is in sadness, they don't have access to their faith because they can't see beyond the despair that they're in. And he says, Aval gam az ein lamar v'chas v'chalila eino ma'amin. But even then, in these moments of brokenness and sadness, God forbid a person should say that he doesn't believe. Ma'aminhu gam az rak she'eino margisha. Even in that moment, God forbid a person should say they don't believe. They do believe. They are a believer. It's just at that moment they don't feel it. And then what he's going to go on and say, he's going to say, and why is it that they have belief even in these moments? Because belief is something that doesn't depend on us. Because our faith is something that's handed down to us. Because even if we are not believers, we are the children of believers. It's sort of like built into our DNA through our ancestors to be believers. And so even in the moments of sadness or desperation and crisis, when we're for good reason not able to see another future forward, he says, God forbid to say, I don't believe, that belief is always there for you. Then he has this beautiful metaphor where he says, basically the way that faith works is that there are the parts of our body that we are conscious of their operation, and they're the parts of our body that we are not conscious of their operation. Like my arms moving, like my eyes opening, I'm conscious of those things. I think about them and I make them happy. There's the parts of my body that I'm not conscious of operating, like my breathing. I just, thank God, breathe all the time, right? The breath comes in and out. My heart beats. I don't have to think about that happening. My blood flows. He basically says things that we are, the things that are necessary to our survival are the things that we are not conscious of. They are always happening in the background, even if we do not feel them. The things that we do not need for our survival, that are not critical for our survival, these are the things we're conscious of. And so then he says so beautifully, he says, let's see. Right, he says the hearts and the lungs, he says here, this is not true of the hearts and the lungs. Their function is absolutely essential to a person's survival. And so they cannot depend on a person's consciousness. Because the hearts and lungs are essential, it can't be dependent on our consciousness because it has to be happening all the time. Must continue to function whether the person wills them to or not. Hence, the person is unconscious of their operation. He says, because the body clothes the soul, the same can be said of the soul. All the spiritual functions absolutely necessary to the continued survival of the soul in a person's body. What's necessary? So now he's going to say, what are the things that are necessary to our survival? Like the innate love every Jew has for God and his fellows. We cannot live without love. Love is essential to our survival. Or like faith, are independent of a person's consciousness and out of his control. He's making the argument that faith is essential to our survival. Faith is like our heart beating. Faith is like our lungs breathing. And because it is essential, it's not in our control. It's not dependent upon us. And even if we are not aware of it, like most of the time we're not aware of our heart beating or breathing, that doesn't mean it's not happening. It's just that we're not aware of it. We're not conscious of it. He says, and according to the Rav Shneur Zalman of Liadi, of blessed memory, this is because these functions are innate, inherited traits, and are absolutely vital to the continued functioning of the soul. He said, a person may perhaps become aware of his faith only when he consciously chooses to exercise it. If you think about when suddenly you draw focus to your breathing and you're like, oh my God, I'm breathing. And then suddenly breathing becomes hard because if you draw consciousness, there's this thing that like you do all the time without noticing. And then you can draw consciousness to it. So he says, that's what faith is. That faith is something that's happening in the background all the time, even when you're not conscious of it. It is possible to draw focus of it and then become aware of it, but that it doesn't, you don't necessarily need to do it for it to be operating. He says a person may perhaps become aware of his faith only when he consciously chooses to exercise it. When he practices loving, he becomes aware of his innate love. And when he practices faith, he becomes aware of his faith. It may be true that without the inherited faith and love that we already possess by virtue of our ancestry, we might not be able to practice or increase our love of faith. I'll just read this in the Hebrew for you. That without the faith, the portion of us that comes through our ancestors, it's possible that if we didn't have that inherited base to start off with, it would be impossible for us to add to the faith or the love that we have. He says, Mikol makom, zot asher mosif, kevan shehu hosif, lechen hu yodea mimenu. But when a person this is the language that's being translated in English as exercise, in any event, when a person does add to their faith, when they do the practice of exercising, or really in a conscious way acting on their faith or acting on their love, then they can add to the portion that they inherited, and then they become really conscious and aware of it. And the love becomes sort of revealed in their heart, and the faith becomes something that is felt with certainty. So he's saying, I think, a few things here. One is he's saying, in the first piece that we read from Parshat Shlach, he says, say the thing that is true and honest, and then just take the leap of faith. And then I think this piece is addressing, well, what about for those members of his community who for very good reason are saying no, who are in a state of brokenness, of deep despair, and are saying, I don't believe, I don't feel it, I don't believe. He's saying, I think he's saying, don't worry, even if you don't feel the belief, even if you are in a moment of crisis, the belief is not dependent upon you. Your faith is not dependent upon you. Your faith is something that will always be there for you. It's this innate thing that's passed down and inherited. And at the same time that he says our faith is inherited, I think he is adding something beautiful, because he's saying there's a portion that's inherited, but we actually do have agency to then sort of like practice or exercise our faith, to add to that portion of faith. It's sort of amazing the way he talks about faith and love in the same sentence, that like love can be an exercise, faith can be an exercise, that on the one hand, it sort of happens unconsciously, if not dependent upon us. And on the other hand, we can have agency to sort of do the work of trying to strengthen our relationship to our faith. Okay, let me pause there. I'll stop screen sharing. Okay, and I'm curious to hear again, sort of how this is resonating with you. What are you finding challenging about it? And so I'll officially turn us to the chat now. So Anita said, it seems to me that many, I just love the question of the connection between prophecy and joy. So Anita says, seems to me that most of the prophets weren't exactly in states of joy when they were prophesizing. So Anita, that's a really good point. That in fact, a lot of their prophecies are like prophecies of despair and desolation that are coming because their community are in total despair and sort of crisis. That's true, Anita. And also there's a reference he references it in a different drasha, where he makes the same connection to prophecy and joy, that there's a moment, I think, in Malachim Bet, in the second book of Malachim, where it says Elisha, who was a prophet, lost the ability to prophesize. And Elisha says, Kichuli men again, bring me a minstrel, bring me someone to sort of play music for me and make me merry. And then sure enough, they bring him like a merrymaker, a minstrel. And then it says the hand of God was upon him, and his prophecy came back to him. So on the one hand, Anita, that's true. The way he addresses that is he said, like, you don't have to be fully in a state of joy, but sometimes you just need a little bit of joy to rouse you from whatever the place you were, and then you have access to it. But that's a really good point. Okay, Deborah says, apologies for all the provocative questions, but I'm struggling with this passage. Deborah, did you write somewhere else what your questions were? I very much welcome all of your provocative questions. Oh, so here we say, Deborah says, can faith be misused as a rationalization? Right. So I think, Deborah, that's a great question. I mean, Deborah, were you also the one that was asked saying that faith can be dangerous, or was that, I don't know if that was someone else. That was also you. Yeah. I think that the way, sort of, Deborah, what I want to read into that question is, there's both about other people misusing their faith, like there's the judgment of other people relying on their faith and using their faith to justify things that are problematic. There's that. I actually read that question as, how do I trust my own faith? Like in the moments in which I am actually feeling secure in faith, how do I know that I'm not using my faith sort of as a rationalization for something, or that my faith isn't? And I think that that's really hard. It's like how do I like sort of step outside of myself and gain an objective perspective on my faith to know if my faith is actually misplaced, or if I am somehow, God forbid, sort of like polluting my faith or distorting it in some way. I don't have the answer to that, Deborah, but my relationship to the Eish Kodesh is both one of like, there's so much that is compelling and there's so much that raises questions for me. And so I don't have the answer, but I appreciate your questions. So Kathleen says, faith doesn't mean that bad things won't happen, or even that we will have the outcome we want. Faith means that God will be there, never abandoning us or leaving us without what we will need, not want to face the future. So the thing I would just highlight here, Kathleen, and I appreciate you sharing this. Again, Kathleen, I feel like you keep bringing us back to different definitions of faith, which I really appreciate. Is faith about, I have a desired outcome in mind, and I have faith that that desired outcome will happen, right? And then God forbid it doesn't happen, then I'm going to lose faith. Or is faith something else? Faith maybe isn't necessarily about, maybe one's faith could still allow that bad things will happen, or the desire, someone once said to me, with all of the faith that Rabbi Shapira had, Rabbi Shapira died in the Holocaust. So someone said, I'm really challenged by this. With all the faith that Rabbi Shapira had, at the end of every drasha, and end of every passage, he ends it, that God will save us in the blink of an eye, that God will bring our salvation near. And it's so painful to know that with all the faith he had, he ultimately died in the Holocaust. And the person asked, I'm really struggling with this. What was the purpose of all of his faith? Where did it get him? He had faith that that God was going to save him, and then God didn't save him. And I think my answer to that is twofold. One is, we don't know what the desired, I don't know what Rabbi Shapira, when Rabbi Shapira had faith, I don't know what he had faith in. I don't know that it was that he had faith that God was going to save him, or if the faith was something bigger and beyond him, about like God was going to save the Jewish people, that there would be a future. And certainly like that did happen. Maybe it was like a longer term faith of, I don't know about this moment, but sort of faith in this like future that might not even include him directly. So I wonder about that. And I also wonder about, is faith not necessarily about getting the desired outcome, but is it about the ability to like wake up each morning and weather that day? That maybe what that faith got him is, it didn't change the outcome of his life, but it changed his ability to each day be in the circumstances that he was in. So Arnold says, first you choose to believe, and then you can have faith. First you choose to believe, and then you can have faith. Yeah. And then Ronnie says, I think Arnold said the key word, choose. I think you have to choose to believe and then practice belief, right? I like that language that you're both bringing in. Choose to believe, that it's a choice that we make. I think that we see that in the first passage, say the thing that's true and honest, and then mikol makom hineni ma'amin, right? That sounds like a choice there. If I'm saying the thing that is hard and I'm making a choice to take this leap, I think what's hard is sometimes it feels hard to make that choice, especially when it feels like it's like defying or going against things that we might feel are more rational or intellectual. And I love that language that you're bringing in, Ronnie, of, and then you have to practice the belief. I think that feels really inspiring to me, that it's like, belief might not be something that at any given moment that we've nailed. Like, well, now I believe, I've mastered belief, and like, that's it, I can check that off my religious to-do list. But belief is a practice, and it's an exercise, and it's something that's going to change at different moments in our lives, depending on what we're going through, and that we have to keep coming back to it and working on it. That to me feels really important, but it's like, and maybe I'm like, haven't mastered it now, but that's okay, because it's a practice. So I'm going to keep coming back to it. Okay. I'm going to, I'd like to, I think there's a poem on the source sheet, but with your permission, I'm going to save that poem for another day, for a future session. I don't want to jam it into this session. So I think that what I want to do is just take a pause for a second, and to ask you to think of, we sort of like witnessed a lot in his writing, to ask you, like, what is one thing that you are taking away today? What's the thing that you want to take away today? Or what is a hope that you have for yourself, sort of around faith? What's something you're taking away, or what's a hope that you have? And feel free to just take a moment and then put that in the chat. Beautiful. I appreciate your comments so much. Understanding, Anita says, understanding that faith is innate. Mark, I love when you were in the most hopeless situation, you could still have faith in God. I think that's a lot of what we see in the Eish Kodesh writings. In times of hopelessness, how to have hope, in times of powerlessness, how to have agency, right? That maybe the one thing that we can have agency over is our ability to believe in God. Heidi says, I like that he doesn't give in to the circumstance and let the crisis define him. Right, that is something that's so true and profound, Heidi, about his writings, is that overall his writings are like very creative. He has beautiful creative drashot, that he doesn't allow himself to be defined by the circumstances that he's writing in, and does continue writing this Torah that's about faith and hope, despite the circumstances that he's in. Sandy, I love that we all struggle with this. I'm not so different from others or alone in this. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to, so Marla, I appreciate your last comment. I don't have to feel foolish for having faith. It's beautiful. Yeah. And I would say both ways, like, you don't have to feel foolish for having faith, and you don't have to feel foolish for not having faith. But it's like, this is a conversation, and this is a practice. And so I want to just acknowledge that. As I said, this is like personal and vulnerable for me. I'm sure it's personal and vulnerable for all of you. And I really thank you, even in this sort of like large format class, but in this community that I know it's a real community to each other, for like taking the leap of faith and taking the risk to dive into more personal topics. And this is just the beginning of us to sort of continuing to do exactly what he's saying. We're drawing focus to our breath. We're drawing focus to our faith. And maybe by drawing focus to it, we're exercising it, and we can come to some sort of faith and certainty. So next session, next week, we are going to take another look at the Eish Kodesh, a different piece. We're going to be thinking about the relationship between prayer and faith. And I look forward to learning with you then.
Thank you so much, Rav Avi, for teaching and for being so vulnerable and open with all of us. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this, and we're looking forward to seeing you again next week. Have a lovely day or afternoon or evening, wherever you are.